Welcome, everybody, to the first Modus Institute webinar, live cast, if you will, of 2021. With me is my colleague and friend, Mark Graban, who, as I've already said, is smart and does things. So, Mark, do you have a better introduction to yourself than as smart and does things, or does that work?
Oh, thank you for smart. Does things is better than labeling me as says things or writes things. I try to do all of the above, but it'd be interesting to know the background of the people of the audience. I am one of Jim's friends from sort of adjacent realms of work, if you will. I started my career in manufacturing, and I saw a lot of inhumane ways of treating people in that environment. And then for the last 15 years, I've worked in healthcare, where I've seen, unfortunately, inhumane ways of treating people in the workplace. So as Jim said, our alignment is we want to change that. So I'm not the guy to ask about agile points or whatever these things are. And I know Jim doesn't care so much about that either. So that's the alignment. We come from different places, but we have very similar goals when it comes to workplaces, right?
Yes. What Mark might not mention is that he's a multiple award-winning author. He's got a lot of books about lean healthcare, about ways to solve problems, to fix things when they're broken, and generally in ways that don't involve blame, pain, or frustration. So later on, I'm going to put up a link to one of his books that's currently free on the Kindle. But overall, there's a bunch of books in there, and you would be well pressed to read a bunch of them because they're awesome.
Thank you.
On our side, Tony Ann, who's in chat, and I, as many of you already know, we wrote the book Personal Kanban and kind of invented the form. But that for us is simply an instantiation of how we make sure that we treat ourselves well while we're working and share enough information with other people that they can also treat us well. So we actually give people the opportunity to treat us well. So if someone doesn't know how much work is on your plate or what you're stuck on, they're always going to come up and mistreat you because they don't know any better and they just need something. And we could go on for hours about that. But I guess to launch this, this is about humane management in general. So Mark, when we say the word humane management, what does it make you think?
I mean, I think there's different dimensions of that. I think the first thing that comes to mind is safety. So when I mentioned in manufacturing environments and in healthcare environments, physical safety is still a concern in a lot of workplaces. I think it's inhumane to put people in working conditions where they can be injured. That includes ergonomic stresses that accumulate over time. Healthcare, if you look at the data, I think this would surprise people because a lot of healthcare work is very physical. Nurses and other healthcare professionals get injured at really high rates. Like it's up on par with like logging as an industry that people might expect to be dangerous, and it shouldn't have to be. So I think there's physical safety in a lot of workplaces. I'm a big fan of how Amy Edmondson from Harvard frames psychological safety. And I think, in general, this is what I learned, starting my career at General Motors. My idealistic notion that people shouldn't hate coming to work. We don't want to see people burned out. We don't want to see, like in healthcare, there's a really high percentage of nurses who literally quit and leave the profession within the first couple of years. That's due to working conditions. Some of that is, it's all very systemic. Some of it is behavior based. There's a notion, I interviewed a nurse executive recently, for a podcast who talked about this idea that I've heard a lot about in my travels, quote unquote, nurses eat their young. There are these cycles of hazing and cruelty in the workplace, and we can do better than that, and we need to do better than that. So maybe in a way that sounds like that sets the bar really low, but clearly there's still a gap between where we are today and I think where we should be.
Nurses eat their young is a painful sentence.
It is, and it's so there's so we could put bullying into a category of inhumane things in a workplace.
Mm-hmm. Well, and part of that is it's just generic or general respect. So nurses as a whole tend to be not quite at the bottom, but certainly not near the top of the respect ladder in hospitals. They're all considered to be extremely necessary, but also fungible in kind of a sick way.
There's professional pecking order in healthcare, even amongst physicians. Within the physician ranks, there are perceived hierarchies of who is better, not just from seniority, but within disciplines. And nurses sometimes get bullied by doctors. And I thought it was interesting. I asked this nurse executive, well, does some of this roll downhill, unfortunately, where a doctor can get away with bullying a nurse, and then that nurse maybe responds by taking it out on a medical assistant. And she challenged that. And she's like, no, some people are just bullies. It tends not to flow along. Now, like, I think the doctors bullying others may create this permissiveness, this environment that says bullying is accepted, but the bullying might be more excused amongst those who have higher professional rank, or the reality of surgeons bringing in maybe millions of dollars of business in a way a nurse does not. So she was bringing up really interesting issues. And I think this would apply, software companies and salespeople. Sorry to be stereotypical there, but there are some who are notorious for behaving badly. I've been bullied by a software salesperson I worked with almost 20 years ago. And that behavior is often excused if they are a quote unquote high performer, if they're delivering business results. And so. Yeah.
And that was I had a boss once that had actually literally systematized his bullying.
How so?
So he would hire usually young women right out of college who were incredibly capable. And it wasn't difficult because we were working in civil engineering, and it wasn't easy at the time for women to get jobs at all. So my boss would go and he would find them, and they were all awesome. They're all completely awesome, but he would bring them in, he would build them up. And then when they got kind of ahead of steam, and they're like, hey, I can do this. This is really great. He would call them into a private meeting and tear them down and then build them back up again. And it was abuse. I mean, it was just straight up abuse. And when I confronted him about it, because he was mad because when they would be abused by him, they would come to me, and then I would basically say, I would give them the same speech that my boss had just given them, like word for word, because it was rote, and they would be shocked. And he viewed my undermining his authority as undermining his authority. So he called me on the carpet for it, and I said, "What you're doing is abusive." And he says, "No, this is the way you build people up." He's like, I've read many books about how the military works, and this is how you build people up. And I was like, these people aren't in the military. Right. And they were already doing okay. They didn't need your games. Was this person from a military background, or did he just sort of fetishize the perception of how? Yeah. He was. He'd read the prints. But I mean, one of my clients at Children's Medical Center Dallas, an amazing leader. He was the laboratory director. He had retired from military medicine and now was working in the civilian sector. He was a Peter Senge head. I don't know if that's a phrase. He was really into the systems thinking literature and servant leadership and Deming and
Well, he didn't know lean, but when he learned about lean, it resonated with him because it was, I think, building on those foundations of what he already knew and the type of organization he wanted to build. And Jim taught me, is that, well, this stereotypical command and control, bark orders and do whatever I say mentality is like, well, there's a time and a place for that, maybe in battle. But daily life in the military, and especially daily life in military medicine, was not like that at all.
Yep.
So I learned a lot from Jim and appreciated his perspectives on that. And I say that with having no experience in the military of my own. But
right. Well, and that's I think that's true whether somebody is adopting Six Sigma or Lean or Prince 2 or some book that they read about how to get something done. When they take their interpretation of that and try to apply it as an unchanging blunt object, that is inhumane management, kind of like writ large.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how well-meaning you are. If you come in with bullying lean or bullying agile, people are going to rightly resist.
And a little bit of trivia real quick. You might know that you might be surprised by this, Jim. I, at one point, was Prince 2 certified.
And well, at one point, so does that mean that you've strayed? Are you like a recovering?
Do you have to renew that? I assume you have to renew that.
Oh, I thought that once you bought a Prince, it was yours to keep.
That workshop was a frog and it turned into a prince or something. But that's a whole different story of a inhumane work environment. I won't bore you with that story, but I'll tell you sometime over a drink, Jim.
Well, that was the Prince 2 is very big in international government.
Yeah.
Governance. And so in our work with the UN, various elements of the UN, we've run into Prince 2 a lot. And what I think is always funny is people seem genuinely shocked that you can do something less strict. Like flabbergastedly. So they're like, you mean I can talk to my colleagues for real? It's like, yeah, you can. It's okay.
Yeah.
There's no Prince 2 cops, hiding behind the desk that are going to jump out and say, you didn't follow the script.
I don't need to have a conversation approved by the steering committee first.
It's what's also been interesting to watch is that people become very attached to a specific outline of work. Like, let's just say that they get together and they might even do a value stream mapping exercise, or a consultant might come in and help them with it or whatever. And it goes well. And then it stays there long after its shelf life. And they don't realize that a value stream map, isn't concrete, it's cheese. and it's gonna mold and go bad, so you need to renew it. You need to get the value out of it and then go buy some more cheese. And we'll go work at places and then we'll go back 5 years later and they'll still have the same value stream up, and then they're like, we've got all these problems, the system is broken down. It's like, the system didn't break down, you just kept driving the car after it ran out of gas.
Yeah. Well, if it's okay, I want to come back to earlier you used the modifier bullying, and I think we would be in agreement that quote unquote bullying lean is not lean at all.
Mm-hmm.
But what I saw happening 1995 General Motors, this was my first job right out of school. The General Motors management system was predicated on bullying. I mean, that's what I saw, at least at the plant where I worked. And that was the experience that I had. Yelling and cursing and screaming and stomping your feet and blaming people for systemic problems that were usually created by management, but blaming the workers for that. But GM had that bullying style, And remember, one of the leaders there would kind of try to rationalize, maybe like that person you were talking about, Jim, he would rationalize it as, well, I get blamed and bullied. So then, it's just that's how we lead here. But when they hired people from Toyota suppliers, there was somebody from Nissan, there were people brought in to try to help teach lean. But in that framework and foundation of bullying, it became, I guess you could call it bullying lean. Like I'll use an example, and there might be parallels to reviews or retrospectives or whatever you might call it in software land. But this daily review that was supposed to happen between first and second shift. And every department was expected to track their hourly production numbers. This is not rocket science, but this is often considered part of lean management. You have your theoretical, if everything worked well, we would make 92 parts per hour. Then you'd write down the actual, and then you would explain the gap in between. Mm-hmm. And in one environment, let's say a Toyota supplier plant, that's data, right? It's fact. We want to understand where the constraint is in the plant right now for these departments that flow into each other, so we can allocate resources and be helpful and supportive and prioritize problem solving. And, but no, these hourly numbers were used to bludgeon people. Mm-hmm. You roll up that sheet of paper and it turned into a hammer, and people would get yelled at and smacked with the hammer. And the poor consultant, the people who were brought in to be internal consultants were like, well, this is not what we intended at all when we taught that tool. I'm like, well, unfortunately, yeah. I mean that, and so was the plant better off because they had that lean practice that armed inhumane leaders, bullying leaders with the information they needed to bully people? No, we probably weren't net better off because of that. And that led to all kinds of dysfunction of people fudging the numbers and hiding problems and all the things that might be predictable to people in this audience.
I often see KPIs not be key performance indicators, but things used to kill people indiscriminately. And the